Welcome to Texas Heart Institute Interactive Educational Series. I'm your host. My name is Zvonimir Krajcer. I'm Peripheral Vascular Intervention Program Director in the Department of Cardiology at Texas Heart Institute. I'm also President of the International Society of Endovascular Specialists. Our special guest today is Dr. Miguel Montero-Baker. He is an Associate Clinical Chief in the Division of Vascular Surgery and Endovascular Therapy at Baylor St. Luke's Medical Center. Dr. Montero-Baker will present today with me controversy and current status of Paclitaxel-eluting devices for treatment of Femoro-popliteal Obstructive disease. Dr. Montero-Baker, give us an insight. What is Paclitaxel controversy all about, and how did it all begin?
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Krajcer, for having me here. It's a pleasure to be part of the Texas Heart Institute online educational services. But let's start this with a very hot topic, which is the Paclitaxel debate. So this goes back to a very I would say disruptive paper that was published last year towards the end of the year in JAMA, where Katsanos and colleagues reported on 28 published studies and based on intention to treat rather than as treated outcomes on the relationship between mortality and the use of devices for the treatment of Femoro-popliteal disease. What came from this was that there was certainly a signal of mortality that was viewed to be increscendo. So initially, in the control group at 1 year, there was no signal, but as you went on to the third and the fifth year, there was a stronger relationship of mortality when patients were on the intention to treat side of Paclitaxel. So certainly there was a lot of crossover in the groups and obviously no detail onto any causality there was, but this was certainly a relationship that was found. Now, one of the stronger points of this paper, which is what a lot of people viewed as a very strong point towards this discussion, was that there was a dose-time relationship. So those patients that received more stents or had more balloons used, then they had a greater mortality of all-cause deaths. So obviously this threw, it was a big boom in our specialty, as this has been probably one of the most disruptive treatments we have. We know that the products do relate to less reinterventions, and so we were using this on a daily basis. So what do you think this, Dr. Krajcer, if I can ask you, what do you think transpired after this? What was the effect of this in our daily practice?
Well, there were certainly a lot of critics that looked very negatively at the publication by Katsanos and co-workers and their meta-analysis. One of the major criticism was that Katsanos and co-workers pooled data from 28 studies. And of course, there were a lot of differences as far as inclusion, exclusion criteria is concerned, demographics, and primary endpoint and secondary endpoint, and so on. And they questioned, therefore, on the basis of this evaluation with using pooled data, the validity of their meta-analysis. Also, critics argued that as treated analysis that Katsanos didn't use, rather than intention to treat analysis, would more accurately depict mortality risk. As you already mentioned, there was a lot of crossover from two groups, from basically a balloon angioplasty group to an intervention group with either stents or with balloons that were coated with Paclitaxel. And actually, as you have mentioned previously, in the Zilver PTX trial, there was almost 40% crossover from the PTA to the stent group, and that is a significant number that could have impacted and changed the outcomes to a significant degree. From my point of view, it is also difficult to understand that the very low dose of paclitaxel that is being used in drug coating technologies at the present time, it's roughly 2,000 lower dose than what has been used in malignancy treatments. And with such a short life span of this drug on those devices, it is difficult to explain late-term mortality. And as this was not demonstrated with other studies with significantly higher doses for treatment of malignancies, particularly for treatment of breast malignancies. In addition to that, paclitaxel has been extensively used for the last several decades for treatment of coronary disease with drug-eluting technology, either balloons or stents, and there was no information from those studies that there was any significant toxicity of paclitaxel on cardiovascular system or in any other organ as well.
So the response with such a disruptive paper, what was then the response of the health agencies or authorities as well as some of the companies to this meta-analysis?
Well, FDA was obviously very concerned about this particular information that was released in this meta-analysis by Katsanos and co-workers. And they initiated their own analysis of Paclitaxel-eluting devices for treatment of Femoro-popliteal Obstructive disease. And the first panel with experts in the field and the companies convened on March 15, 2019 in Washington, D.C. And FDA, by performing their own preliminary analysis of mortality risk associated with paclitaxel from the 3 trials that were included in the Katsanos' paper, and that was 975 patients, they analyzed basically impact admiral data, Zilver PTX data, and also Lutonix drug-coated balloon data. From this preliminary analysis, they found that there was a mortality signal. And they analyzed further this information, and it could not find with certainty the signal magnitude of any importance as far as the long-term data is concerned, because of the small number of trials that were carried on up to 5 years, and because a lot of data were missing from this trial. So FDA requested from the industry to provide additional information from their studies. Dr. Montero-Baker, can you tell us what was the response from the industry and what were the findings from the industry information when additional data were analyzed, particularly concentrating on the topic of looking at as treated analysis rather than what Katsanos did, intention to treat analysis?
Right. It was obviously very important for industry to also reveal patient-level data, because mortality as a whole really is somewhat vague to try to land. So it was very important that the FDA would reach out to every company, would say, hey, we need to look at your data, we need to look at every single detail, and obviously the companies went into full throttle to try to get all of these data points and reanalyze these late mortality signals.